I want to put a pebble in people's shoe that they can that to sort of jar them to bring these two concepts together, money and meaning. Those aren't always sort of discussed in the same sentence in the same conversation. But one thing that the book has ended up doing, and now Shaping Wealth has done, is that it gives people permission to go there.
I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Mitlin Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Mitlin Financial. Today's guest is Brian Portnoy, the founder of Shaping Wealth. Brian Portnoy is a recognized authority on the psychology of money and the pursuit of financial well-being. As the founder of Shaping Wealth, Brian combines his expertise in behavioral finance with practical strategies for building a fulfilling life. His groundbreaking work helps individuals and organizations go beyond traditional wealth management to cultivate true financial wellness and clarity around their goals. With decades of experience in the financial industry and a background as an author of acclaimed books like The Geometry of Wealth, Brian has a unique approach to understanding money's role in our lives. His work encourages us to see wealth as a tool for creating purpose, connection, and happiness. Join us as we delve into Brian Portnoy's journey, explore his insights on behavioral finance, and discover how Shaping Wealth is redefining what it means to be truly wealthy. Well, I am super excited for today's show. We have Brian Portnoy, the founder of Shaping Wealth. It is such a pleasure to have you with us here today, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So listen, we'll talk a lot about shaping wealth, but I am, and I say this at the opening of every show, I am so fascinated with the entrepreneurial journey that everybody has a different path, but there's also a lot of similarities there as well. So, can you share your path to founding Shaping Wealth, and then we'll dive in heavily into Shaping Wealth and what you're up to today?
Yeah, it's a timely question. My kids are 22, 20, and 18, so we're having a lot of conversations about heading into college, heading out of college. What does a career look like? And I think that probably the thing that I stress to them, but anybody that I talk to about this, and I try to mentor as many young folks as possible, is that life isn't linear. I'm on my fifth career, as I currently count it. Started out in politics, went into academia, then went into investment research, then writing and education, and then I started my own coaching platform. And over the course of, I'm embarrassed to say, 35-year career, the theme has been curiosity, hustle, and adaptation. The world's a fascinating place, Larry. Lean into what you find fascinating and see what difference you can make. So, the company that I started a few years ago, Shaping Wealth, a coaching and content platform, focus on the intersection of human behavior and financial planning. It's sort of the unpredictable outcome of a whole variety of things I did in terms of managing investment portfolios, writing books on behavioral finance, giving speeches all over the world on human behavior. And here I am.
So you basically brought everything together for this, latest and greatest in the form of shaping wealth. It sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. So my favorite, and I don't know when we saw each other last when I gave a talk, probably my favorite line from social psychology is by a guy named Dan Gilbert. Wrote a brilliant book called Stumbling on Happiness, and he's got this amazing line where he says that human beings are works in progress who mistakenly think they're finished. I love that. Human beings are works in progress who mistakenly think they're finished. I'm not finished. I know you well enough to know that you're not finished. That's the good stuff, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Now, you've been referred to as someone who can put words to important things. Is that something that you've always had such a poise with the pen? Is that something that's always come naturally for you?
I don't think anyone who writes for a living would say that it comes naturally. It's like chewing glass, crawling across gravel, however you want to say it. Um, my writing career began in earnest about 15 years ago, but I've always enjoyed putting pen to paper. And there's a great line from someone that you don't know what you think until you write it down. Um, I think there's maybe a misconception about writing that, oh, you have a great idea and I just got to get it on paper. That's actually not true. You got to flip that on its head and recognize that you sort of discover your thoughts as you go through the hard work of writing. I find it deeply pleasurable. I mean, a lot of people don't. Some people like running, they like baking bread, they like doing their day job, whatever. But those flow states where time stops, the world disappears, and 3 hours later you've forgotten to eat, you've forgotten to call your wife or your husband. All that, those flow states are most likely to happen to me when I am just sort of grinding through ideas and trying to come up with the word or the sentence or the paragraph that captures something. And then, boy, then you put out into the world and you see what happens.
Magic, right? Yeah, and I will tell you, I did enjoy, and we had him on the show as well on episode 180. We had Josh Brown, and I did enjoy the book How I Invest My Money, which I know you were involved with too, amongst many other works. So it's something that you seem to have definitely a knack for, and you could tell that you must get into that flow state just by that, reading what you put on paper. It's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, the project with Josh was fun. How I Invest My Money. He and I edited that book together, and it was a. I loved what we put together. I love how it was received and the impact that it's made. And honestly, it's kind of cool to see your works translated into other languages, to see them in airport bookstores. I take pride in those things.
Yeah, as you should, as you should. Now, let's dive into some of the stuff that shaping wealth is all about. And for our listeners who are entrepreneurs, executives, etc., just people, right? Can you share with them the difference between being rich and wealthy? Because you have a very clear differentiation between the two, if you will.
Yeah, I appreciate that as sort of being the opening question because it really is the fork in the road. It's literally page one of The Geometry of Wealth, which is the book that has inspired this part of my career at Shaping Wealth. So being rich is the search for more. Being wealthy is a mindset. So rich is the search for more. And the thing about more is that when we achieve it, we want something else, which is more. One of my favorite shows of all time, Mad Men, the, antagonist or protagonist or antagonist, depending on how you define him, Don Draper says that happiness is that feeling right before you want more happiness. That's the search for more. It's not a bad thing. More creates success. It creates progress. We're hardwired, really, from a neurological point, for more. But there's something ultimately unsatisfying about it. And so we know, hey, you make $1 million, great. Well, then you want two. You make two. Well, now I want three or four, and it really never ends. And it's hard to tamp that down. To me, wealthy, the term that I coined is funded contentment. This is the idea that true wealth is the ability to underwrite a life that's meaningful to you, however you choose to define that at this moment in time, however you choose to define that or are compelled to update that through life's inevitable but unpredictable changes. So true wealth is funded contentment. And that notion of funded contentment, I know I coined the term, but I feel more lucky than good. It seems to have landed in the world with friends, neighbors, and complete strangers from the other side of the planet, where it's kind of captured kind of the vibe or the mindset that people want. You want to lead a really good life, a deeply contented life, and you want to have the resources to afford those things, to underwrite those things. So the vision statement for shaping wealth is funded contentment for everyone. That true wealth is a mindset that can be learned, shared, coached, and scaled across entire societies.
Yeah, amazing. I love that term. And you know, you've said, and you just did, maybe not in the exact same words, that funded contentment just seemed to land with people, right? It just sat well. And we felt something similar here at Mitlin in terms of around the term joy and asking folks what did they do today that brought them joy, which we'll talk about with you a little later on. But how do you feel that discovering these words, funded contentment, has really transformed your life? Because it seems like it's really had a major impact, as you said, on those that you're speaking with, but also it seems like it's transformed your life as well.
It has. I mean, Larry, it's crystallized the life that I want to live with Tracy and the kids, and how we want to, live inside our community and just move forward. I mean, I'll make brief reference to another concept that's not really relevant, but the process is. So I was listening to a guy named Cal Newport on the Tim Ferriss show talk about the idea of deep work. Cal Newport, brilliant guy, mega bestseller author. He wrote a book on deep work, and it was about those flow states that you find and in the work that you do that you really enjoy. And the thing that he said to Tim Ferriss that I really appreciated was, like, he didn't invent deep work. It's just a thing. He just came up with a really pithy way of capturing something that is very valuable to people. I did the same thing with funded contentment, in the sense that, we all sort of know in our bones when we're in that state where we feel deeply contented, that the world is all right, that there's a certain stillness or even mindfulness, and it actually does connect to joy. That is that deeper sense. Happiness can be at that higher level of, you're in a good mood or you're in a bad mood, but whether it's contentment or joy or fulfillment, or frankly what Aristotle 2,400 years ago called eudaimonia, that's the Greek word for all of these things. Funded contentment captures that, but adds the money piece to it, because financial well-being is actually quite central to how we're doing in the world. It's just such an intimidating topic for most people. It's hard to connect the money piece to the meaning piece.
Yeah. And I agree with all. I think that happiness is almost like this, unattainable thing. It's something that it's not something that we could always be in that state, right? It's something we're striving to always be in that state, but joy and funded contentment are really measurements of how we're feeling in that moment, and are we closer to happiness or further away from it, right?
Right. I mean, so in the geometry of wealth, I think an important distinction that I draw on the psychological literature from and then expand a little bit is contrasting experienced happiness versus reflective happiness.
Mhm.
Experienced happiness is you wake up, you're in a good mood, you're in a bad mood, you have a good day, you have a bad day. It just comes and goes. And it's like that search for more. You know, you achieve it, but then okay, what's the next thing? The clunky term that psychologists use is hedonic adaptation. We just get used to our emotional state and then we move on.
Right. Right.
I would contrast that with reflective happiness, and it's baked into the term reflective. You step back, you put a little brain energy into thinking about the big questions. Am I living a good life? Am I living a meaningful life? Am I living a life filled with love and joy? The brain is an engine that uses energy, and so we can't do that too much. It's literally physically exhausting. But when you lean into that reflective happiness and begin to ask, "Am I living with joy? Am I finding contentment?" That doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a great mood, but it could very well mean that you are engaged in things in the world that bring meaning to you, however you are defining that.
Imagine a relationship where financial conversations don't feel stressful, but actually bring you joy. We've designed a guide to help you have positive, meaningful money conversations with your partner. This isn't just another budgeting tool, it's a roadmap for building trust and connection. So if you're ready to start a joyful money journey with your partner, go to mitlin.us/couplesjoy and download your free guide. Transform your financial future together starting today. Let's talk about your book, The Geometry of Wealth. I know you've talked about it a few times here, but the subtitle of your book is How to Shape a Life of Money and Meaning. Why do you think the subtitle of the book is so important?
Because I want to put a pebble in people's shoe that they can that to sort of jar them to bring these two concepts together, money and meaning. those aren't always, sort of discussed in the same sentence, in the same conversation. But one thing that the book has ended up doing, and now Shaping Wealth has done, is that it gives people permission to go there. So often you're talking to, in a financial context, you're talking about the stock market, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about all this macroeconomic data. And for most people, that's actually not terribly interesting unless the other,
Noise.
it's noise. It's noise. And to be honest, some financial advice is sort of just bad theater.
Hmm.
One actor is playing an economist or a market prognosticator who's typically wrong, and the other person is pretending that they care. And they have this exchange over markets and economies when the real question that's being asked is the most foundational question to our humanity. Am I going to be okay? We are so finely tuned with a survival instinct, Larry. If the slightest thing happened in my office or your office right now that seemed amiss, we would know what that is. We are so fine tuned for danger in our environment, and not just physical danger, but psychological danger, because our identity is our most valuable asset. And so what we talk about when, we bring money and meaning into the same conversation is giving permission to anyone to reflect on what's probably keeping them up at night, worrying about, am I going to be okay? My partner, my kids, my parents, my neighbors, my community. And then the next level is, well, what does it mean? What does a meaningful life mean?
Right.
Meaning to that word. And in the book, I discuss four sources of contentment or meaning. And that's the moldable clay that you have either in your own mind or in your conversation with your financial advisor about the goals that you want to achieve. That moldable clay is where we really begin to build something beautiful.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you say the word, people are striving to know that they're okay, right? It reminds me of a family that we were working with that I knew that that's what they were striving for. And
Mhm.
we said to them as they were entering retirement, the husband was starting to retire. We told them it was going to be a new paradigm for them that they had to get used to. But we reinforced a couple of times that they were going to be okay. And the first meeting we had after they retired, they were freaking out. Like they were super nervous. And we were talking about, numbers, and I was looking at them and I could tell it wasn't resonating. And I'm like, what exactly is still, they said, we just want to know we're going to be okay. And I said, oh, I guess I just need to reinforce this, right? Because we talked about that in our previous like 3 or 4 meetings. But I think the point is, we as humans, I don't know that one time hearing that is going to be, sufficient. I feel like we have to repeat that until there is that feeling of funded contentment, and reinforcing that okay. Because even though you say it, sometimes people don't necessarily hear it after it's repeated, until it's repeated a few times.
More is a number, enough is a mindset, and mindsets have to be cultivated and maintained over time. You
Right.
don't sort of establish that sense of enough, that sense of presence and stillness, and that you're going to be okay, because as humans, we kind of move on to the next thing. We don't have the highest attention span.
And going down, right? It's getting lower by the year, I think, right?
Well, you joke, but it's a joke that's not funny.
Right.
The We live in the age of distraction, and as a result, we live in the age of anxiety.
Mhm.
So I call it the paradox of prosperity. It's, I'll put it crudely, and then I'll explain a little bit more, which is that we've never been richer and we've never been more miserable.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have more material abundance, more prosperity than any point before in recorded human history. We live in more opulence than the kings and queens of France did 200-300 years ago. We have amazing things.
Yeah.
Thankfully, things like hunger and childhood mortality, like the really bad stuff, we've come a long, long way. And at the same time, we've got, sort of record rates of anxiety, stress, depression, loneliness. And there's something going on in our information ecosystems, in the world of social media, where we're not particularly psychologically healthy. And so you can have people who are running great businesses and making great money. They've got multi-million dollar portfolios, and they're still coming to you, Larry, as a financial advisor and saying, am I okay? Am I going to be okay?
Right.
And there's sort of a jarring moment like, oh, you've got 8 million bucks, you're 63 years old. Like there's almost no circumstance imaginable in which you couldn't afford everything that you ever wanted. But the fact is that we're not just, leaning into our physical safety, we're like leaning into our psychological safety. And that protection needs to happen over and over again. And that's okay. That's not irrational.
Right.
That's normal. That's
Hmm.
just who we are. And the cool thing about where, sort of the world of financial advice is, because what we coach financial advisors, is that these conversations about your humanity and whether you're going to be okay are increasing. They're not just legitimate. They're right in the centerpiece of the dialogue. And I think
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I agree. They have to be happening because if they're not, you're missing out big time.
They weren't.
No, for a very long time. No, I think that, like your description of our wealth, right, being much better than it was, but at the same time not solved. I think this is similar, right? We've come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but we have come a long way.
It's back to the rich versus wealthy.
Right.
You can be rich but not wealthy.
Agreed.
And and by the way, you could be wealthy but not rich.
True. So you became a first-time entrepreneur in your 50s. What was it like? What was that like? And what did it teach you, for others that, who might be thinking about stepping out and kind of going on their own entrepreneurial journey, similarly to you?
Yeah, turn around and go the other way.
Oh, please, come on.
I don't know, man. I mean, I've always been willing to bet on myself in the sense that, I have coursed through a number of careers in politics and academia and investing and writing and educating and now, building this business, a coaching and content platform. And they're all connected and there's a through line. I'd like to say that a large part of success in life is being able to paint the bullseye after you've shot the arrows. So, you're just randomly like doing
Ready,
things.
fire, aim.
Yeah. And like, you end up where this one arrow is, and then you paint the bullseye around that arrow and you say, hey, I nailed it. When in fact, the arrows are everywhere, right? I think it's about courage. And I also think it's about vulnerability. One of the people who's really influenced me the most in this part of my journey of my career is Brene Brown, author, all around wise person, psychologist. And, probably her most famous line or insight is that vulnerability is the source of courage. I leaned into this a few years ago. I walked away from a very high paying job and decided I needed to scratch this itch. I needed to run this through and see where it went. And it's hard. I mean, almost every single day involves a combination of a sense of both like unlimited success and impending failure.
Mhm.
It's the wildest thing. It's a complete it messes with your mind. So I think, what I've learned is that there is an entrepreneurial mindset. I think I have it. I've had the courage to do this. I've had the courage to lean in. I'm deeply passionate about my ideas, but I'm also deeply passionate about the team that I've built and the clients that we work with. So that's all kind of come together. But, you're on the tightrope without a net here. And honestly, that corporate track, which I did for 25-ish years, 20, 23, 25 years, that's cool. And that's where most people land. And it's a really good thing. You can find enormous fulfillment and great riches in that. It ends up, I think that it wasn't for me. It just took me about 20 years to discover that.
And going back to what you said about your kids going through, the college planning process, right? Do you feel like being an entrepreneur now and being enveloped in that world has helped you kind of guide them a little bit differently than had you stayed the course in your corporate career?
It's a really good question. And the answer is absolutely yes. Yeah, well, in two senses. Number one, and this is a big conversation that we probably don't have time for, but like I think the world has changed dramatically since the pandemic, and it was already changing. And by changing, I mean that a lot of the old scripts are dead or dying in terms of here's what you're supposed to do. You do well in high school, you go to a 4-year college, you get a degree. I think that the different paths toward typical career success are now many in number, and they were always there. There's just not, I'll call them non-traditional paths that are a lot more legitimate. I think that's a good thing. And then that's from the outside. From the inside, in terms of my entrepreneurial journey, just given the flexibility that I've engaged in my career and what I'm doing now, which requires, just a lot of moving pieces and going in a lot of different directions at once. I think I'm able to share with them a perspective where, back to curiosity, hustle, adaptation, that to me is the recipe. I believe that before I started my company. I believe it tenfold now because when I meet, guys and gals who have, done this and they've had massive amounts of success as an entrepreneur, and I kind of hear their story and listen to what they've done, it's really that same recipe.
Yeah, amazing. Now, you just mentioned a few moments ago Brene Brown. You have referred to the shift in financial planning as an arc from Gordon Gekko to Brene Brown. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it means that over the last half century, last couple generations, that the financial advice or financial planning has gone from a product orientation to a relationship orientation. And there's lots of really interesting steps along the way, but to keep it short, Gordon Gekko, a lot of your listeners will remember the movie Wall Street. Blue Horseshoe loves Anacott Steel, and the main character wasn't Gordon Gekko, it was Bud Fox, and Bud Fox was a financial advisor. He put his best clients into his best ideas, but he was just a broker. And there's nothing wrong with selling good investment product as long as it's being done ethically and it maps up to the client's needs and risk tolerance and all that kind of stuff. But Bud went to jail for doing some pretty shady things, and so it's a bit of a dramatic thing. Gordon Gekko to Brene Brown, obviously lean into the alliteration, but 50 years ago, this was just about a business about selling kind of high priced investment products to people and saying, hey, this is probably good for you. Well, to the famous book Where Are the Customers Yachts, that was a practice that really made the broker rich and not necessarily the client. Today, and you're part of the wave, the very positive wave, I think we are too, at Shaping Wealth. This is really about asking questions on the life that our clients want to live, not just financially but more broadly. What does it mean to flourish? What does it mean to find joy, to find contentment? And being able as a financial advisor to listen in ways that the client truly feels seen and heard, to move beyond just goals. Hey, I want to retire at age 63 with $3 million so that at a 4% withdrawal rate, I've got the following cash flows. Like, okay, that's important, and that's an exercise that can be done in about 5 minutes. But what can't be done in 5 minutes is a real and ongoing conversation about what's truly important to you and how you want to achieve those things, or sort of evolve into that mindset. So Brene Brown to me is just sort of a ninja level expert in emotional intelligence, in asking the right questions, in listening, in not speaking when there's actually a space that you can create for others to be heard. She's wonderful. There's a lot of people who are like this. So Gordon Gekko to Brene Brown, I think it just captures the fact that I think financial advice is a truly virtuous profession. I don't think we tell our story particularly well as an industry,
Right.
but from the bottom up, there are countless advisors who are doing amazing work for their clients. And it's more because they have evolved into to their own version of Brene Brown and evolved away from those old school notions of Gordon Gekko.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I want to share because you were talking about the families in terms of that emotional and giving them space. So, it seems that your generosity is rooted in tikkun olam, which is a Jewish term for being charitable, and that part of the generational legacy, is raising children in gratitude. Can you expand or talk about legacy being more than a bank account? Because I think sometimes many people think about their legacy is leaving money to their children or grandchildren or something like that. And I think you have a very different view on that.
Boy, this is big. How do I answer this in a way where I don't get too emotional? So I do think about this a lot, especially into my 50s. I think this is something that begins to happen. It's a little bit weird, but also like completely normal, I'm told. And yeah, I don't really think about my bank account much. I think a lot about the young adults that my kids are growing into and how I can support them. And I'm not always the best dad, not even close, but we've tried to raise, Ben and Zach and Sarah with a set of values that, you know, as they go out into the world, they're just going to do good things. And we all know, I'm guessing the same as with your boys, they probably watch more than they listen, meaning we are role models. They are observing our behavior more than they are taking our verbal advice. And so, what can you do to create that environment where they're taking on those values? And when I think now about demonstrating some of that for them, I guess maybe there's two things. I really haven't thought about it in this way exactly. One is having written the Geometry of Wealth and dedicated it to the three of them as well as Tracy. There's an element of, hey, this idea of funded contentment is just foundationally important. And I would love for you, my kids, to consider this over time. I mean, when the book was published in 2018, so it was some years ago, they were just by definition much younger. It wasn't for them then. I wrote it knowing they would read it 10 or maybe 20 years later, and that's okay.
Hmm.
You plant a tree now knowing that it's not going to, bloom for quite some time. So writing about funded contentment in the way that I have, building an entire business around this idea, kind of hoping they're watching. I don't know, Larry. I hope.
I'm
And
sure
then the
they are.
second piece, which I'll be very quick on, is my move toward being an entrepreneur and then seeing me bust my hump basically 7 days a week and leaning into that hustle that I talk about, the curiosity. I hope that that becomes part of my legacy, that they can thrive seeing what might be driving success.
Yeah. Good stuff. And yeah, my wife and I, Denise, we always say our job is to raise good humans at the end of the
Mhm.
day. That's it. End of story. Right. So, and I think that everything you talked about is leading in that direction. So we applaud you for that. So it's been a pleasure having you on, Brian. We ask each of our guests the same final question. We've talked a lot about joy. I referenced this early on in our conversation, and that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
All right, so people will listen to this whenever. It's relatively early in the morning, so
Yeah.
I poured a delicious cup of coffee that made me
Mhm.
happy for a moment. So there's two things. One is I had a meeting with my team, an early morning meeting with my team a bit ago, and it was a wonderful brief conversation about sort of the things that we have to do over the next couple months, and we celebrated a couple wins that were important. And I think it's important for me as kind of the leader of the team to remind us, for as hard as this is, we should celebrate some of the victories. The other thing is that later today, my best friend is coming to town and going to spend a couple days with me.
Awesome.
And so I haven't experienced the joy yet. However, not to go back to psychology and neuroscience, a lot of the joy that we have in life is based on anticipation as opposed to the experience itself.
Sure.
So I've been like so excited for Rob to come visit later today, and he'll be around for a couple days, and we're going to have a great time.
Awesome. Sounds like you got a joyful day ahead. So
I do.
listen, Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on, and we're going to have all of your information and all of the information for shaping wealth in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, learn more about shaping wealth, connect with you, what's the easiest and the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to our website, shapingwealth.com. I'm active on LinkedIn, so for people who are in the industry, easy to find me there as Brian Portnoy. But in terms of the vision and the mission that we're trying to live, that's all captured at shapingwealth.com.
Awesome. Well, listen, Brian, it's been a pleasure. I thank you for taking out your time to spend with us. I wish you all the best and a joyful day ahead with your friend Rob for the weekend. And we'll talk soon. Enjoy your day.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. This is great.
I want to thank Brian Portnoy for being a guest on the Mitlin Money Mindset. Brian and Shaping Wealth are leading the wealth management profession to areas that have often been overlooked, but truly are the cornerstones of true wealth. He and his team are assisting advisors, leaders, and firms to take their practices to the next level. Brian is impacting the profession in a way that we can only imagine where it will lead us in years to come. It is redefining what true wealth really is. Brian Portnoy and Shaping Wealth can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.